Oh yeah, I've got the record. Hang on a second. Sorry. Good. Yep. Okay, I'm just recording in case anybody wants to go back and look at this in the future. Right. What I want to cover off today is just a little more delving into pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, and just a bit of a way to think about the safety of those road users. With pedestrians and cyclists being sort of that active transport mode, I want to talk and delve into how to think through those aspects. So again, I'm just going to share my slides, but do pop in any questions as we go. I do in this session have a few points where I'm going to get you to do little activities and have some input, and we will have a break in about 45 minutes time. It might even be a little less than that. Okay. Okay, so vulnerable road users, that's the term we use for pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists as well. So often we, might think about vulnerable road, vulnerable being a term for like maybe children or the elderly or the like. The vulnerability when we talk about it in road safety is really around the lack of protection from physical force. So they're vulnerable to injury compared to having a shell around them. So vulnerable road users, pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists. Often people forget motorcyclists are in that vulnerable road users category. So we talked about exposure, likelihood, and severity, and that's something I want you to continually sort of think about, and it applies across the board in any aspect of road safety, really. Where even if you're doing policy style road safety thinking, licensing, or the like, you can try to understand whether you're influencing exposure, likelihood, and or severity. I mean, a lot of sort of in trying to improve driver behavior or skills or these sorts of things is trying to center in then on the likelihood aspect. If we're trying to reduce speeds, we're probably influencing both likelihood and severity, although it's often, if you're talking high speed, the severity levels are beyond what we can handle as humans. So getting people from driving at 110 to driving at 100, we're really more focusing on the likelihood of crashes there, because the severity we know is going to be very bad if and when events happen. Yes, if the policy decisions and the like are around barrier systems or other measures, then we are addressing the severity there. And exposure is an interesting one in road safety, sort of at a bigger picture strategic policy level, because we can think about mode selection, getting people into safer modes of transport, public transport, and the like. And it can be thought of as a road safety intervention as well. Certainly, people taking the bus can be safer, or train, or the like. So we shouldn't, I suppose, forget about it from that perspective. But in the individual sort of intersection style thinking, exposure is usually around blocking off vehicles entering, and so diverting them to safer intersections or separated facilities and those sorts of things. And I gave you those examples, and I just remind you, especially of that exposure one, which is a bit hard often to get the head around, but it's really trying to remove the conflict point altogether by blocking an intersection or a level crossing or a point of conflict, or separating, as I mentioned there, with full separation. And that becomes important when we think about vulnerable road user safety and active transport, and how they interface with sort of safe system thinking. I'll talk to you a lot about that in the next hour. This is more sort of when we get into safe system assessing, which will be when I come down there in person and we go out and we do it. There's a bit more sort of specific clarity around the definition of exposure, but I'm happy to that for now. But by the end of this module, we want to connect movement and place thinking with safe system thinking. And movement and place I'll explain to you shortly, but it's really a good way of thinking about transport planning, and it's the way that a lot of jurisdictions are going, and how that links with safe system is important, and we can ride the coattails of movement and place, I think, to get some really great safety outcomes. We want to identify characteristics of vulnerable road users that align highly with safe system principles, and categorize key risk factors into their exposure, likelihood, and severity. That's the plan today. I'll start by explaining movement and place to you, and then, as I say, I'll get you to do a little bit of thinking yourself. So movement and place is a sort of concept or a framework for strategic planning of a road network. That it's probably best described if I put the this diagram up. And I picked one of the many movement and place framework diagrams, charts that are out there. I just picked this one because I think it sort of explains things quite nicely. It's all a similar concept. It's slight tweaks on it, slight terminology changes. But the idea is that a road network, so roads and streets, well, okay, they were originally developed for movement, weren't they? I mean, we were trying to move people and goods from A to B, and so we built roads, we built streets, we built highways. But then over time, they sort of build up into something that's more than just this movement corridor sometimes, and then they become what we call a place. Now, a place, there's quite intense definitions of place around, and that can be it's really associated with interaction, community interaction, trading, socializing, people there gathering, bars, shops, cafes, all of these things are adding to that place value. Now it's thought about at a community level, so it's not an individual's perception of place. It's more that economic vibrance and all those sorts of things. So when you look at any part of a road, like any street or road within Tasmania, you should be able to start to get a general idea of where it would sit on a movement and place framework like this. And so over on the y-axis here, we've got movement importance of this, and we've got really high movement importance over here, and really low movement importance over here as a strategic objective. On the x-axis, we've got high place value and low place value. And you can see hopefully now that you find a spot which meets each of these. And the easiest one to explain really is your motorway. Now your motorway is very high movement function, and it is not a place. It is very much not a place where we want trading, interaction, socialization, those sorts of things. Okay, so that's a very obvious one. But the thing is, I should say that it's not about movement of cars, it's about movement of people and goods. So we could equally sort of have replaced that with a bicycle sort of superhighway, like a completely dedicated bicycle route, which is going from, I don't know, the university to Hobart CBD, and it's completely that, and getting everything else out. That's a movement corridor as well. We don't want people socializing, trading, having their coffees and things on there, because it's about moving the bikes along there as quickly as possible. So don't equate movement specifically to cars and trucks. Just equate it to moving of people and goods. And sometimes that can change. So that's that. Let's go to the other extreme, and let's talk about a something that is very much just a place for people, and that's really a mall, a mall or a mall, depending on which one how you pronounce it. But it's, it was a street at some point. It's really now just said, well, this is for trading, for having the festival and people sitting out having coffees and things like that, and vehicles are really not welcome. And if they're there, they're so very slow, or just going in to collect the bins or something like that. But we're not trying to move people and goods through this area. This is a place for people. And so then you start to see that you can categorize your road and your street in different ways. Now, why is this important under safe system? Well, first of all, safe system is about we absolutely acknowledge in the safe system that we have to continue to move people and goods. It's critical to the economy. It's critical to people's lives and what we want to be doing, right? So we don't want to ever stop that, but we want to think about how do we ensure that is happening on routes where we have the infrastructure in place to cater for those speeds. And likewise, if we've got an area where we don't want that movement, or we don't need that movement to happen, and in fact, we don't want it for other social reasons, we would then engineer and design and plan the road environment to not cater for that movement function. Each of these sort of categorizations in their own right, and then we'll do a little bit of thinking. So these places for people, I talked about the mall or the mall down here, but you can get, it sort of edges up where there's still places where you might have some vehicles going through, or bikes sort of moving through the area, but you're still retaining quite a high place value, and maybe you're trying some tactical urbanism, different things. But it's really not about pushing vehicles through there as fast as you can. So I thought, if that's the case, and we're talking about a place for people, which is, as I say, down here, high place value, low movement requirements. If we use this artistic impression, what I want you to do is just have a little bit of a think about how could this road environment be altered if you sort of found out, okay, this is a place for people. It's got high place value, or we want to make it somewhere with high place value, but low movement function. How would you change this environment to get us better place value, but also give us much better safe system alignment? Now, as you think about what you're going to change, I want you to think also about, is my suggestion here altering the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity? So what I'll get you to do is just have a think, and either jot it down into the chat or just jot it down on a bit of paper, and you can speak it. What would you change, and would it influence exposure, likelihood, and severity? And doing this all under the premise that we want this to be a place for people. So you can see there, it's 40 km/h speed zone through here. You've got vehicles going through there, and people obviously there already. Okay, so let's have a think about that. I'm just gonna gave you a little insight into the future there. I've lost the ability to see any of you, so I'm going to try to find you again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so have a think about that. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to just have a think about it and what you might change. Ask any questions if you want, although I can't quite see the chat, so you're going to have to unmute yourself if you want to ask any questions.
Does anyone know where my chat's gone?
Your chat's disappeared?
Yeah.
Uh,
I cannot access it.
let me see. No, it's there for me and a few others, so I'm not sure what happening. Have you got, are you?
I'm just going to play around in the settings, but I am here, just so you know.
Yes. Yeah, no. Give me another minute just to come up with some ideas, and either, as we say, write them in the chat if you have the chat available, or when we come back together as a group, we'll have a discussion about some ideas. Okay. Come back now. Oh, still a few people typing. I'll let you finish off what you're typing there. If I do that, see how this goes. Okay, that's not gonna work. Sorry. It's not. I tried to do the PowerPoint bit integrated into Teams. I like to share the screen. It's easier to work through. So let's talk about that. What have we got here? We've got a few things written in. So thank you for having to think about this. So Emily's gone, remove vehicles altogether exposure. And that is just a wonderful way to think about an area as soon as it's been defined as a place for people. Is why are we having vehicles through here at all? Do we need them? Are there alternate routes? What is the purpose of having vehicles through that area? And so we get incredibly good safe system alignment with that, because we have removed the exposure to crashes with vehicles, haven't we? And that's exactly as Emily said there. That is an exposure factor. So Sally's then gone with, can we reroute buses, and that could be influencing the severity. And again, another good question is like, can we remove the larger vehicles, the vehicles that are going to have more of a impact in terms of energy on crashes, and divert them away from that? There's also sort of larger vehicles sometimes have some trouble with vulnerable road users, especially in terms of the ability to see vulnerable road users. For different reasons. They can be hidden behind parts of their cabin or areas. So that's certainly a good one. for, yes, the severity of crashes, but also the likelihood of crashes a bit as well. Would you say it's influencing exposure? Well, it depends. I mean, you might get a few less vehicles, but the dominant proportion of vehicles were the passenger vehicles there. So bike lanes and expand the footpath exposure. So that's an interesting one there from Tom. So what we're doing there, and I suppose I better bring the, I'll bring the slide back up just so we can talk to it again. So if we were to extend the footpath and provide cycle lanes, we're certainly going to improve safe system alignment. The thing that you sort of want to question here is that going to influence exposure or likelihood or severity? But there's a couple of things. If you're providing a bike lane or a bike path as such, you've acknowledged that there is a movement requirement through this area. Now, admittedly, in the place for people categorization, if I go back a slide here, there is a grading there on the movement function. So if it was really down, right down here, then we don't really want that because that's just encouraging movement through there, right? But if it has sort of stepped up there and it's getting more and more movement function, that's when you start adding in these facilities, these more movement style corridors. The widening of the footpath is a really great one, but it's still a widening of an area which is sort of just for pedestrians and a road. It's got a bit of sort of vehicle centric inherent thinking to it. And yeah, so the idea of a real place here would be a pedestrians sort of being able to go everywhere easily without having to stop for any vehicles. Vehicles are the absolute rare anomaly. The area is for pedestrians and it's not a road, really. It's not a street. It doesn't look like that. It's got more that place value to it. If you extend the footpaths and make them wider, that's going to be really good. We'd actually say that reduces the likelihood of crashes, not the exposure. The reason for that is pedestrians are still going to have to cross a road if that's how you've done it. So they're still exposed to the crash. They're just less likely to because they've got less time out there. So that's a good one. So some good stuff in there as it sort of builds up in that movement function. So it's also the same with the idea that was in there with providing dedicated crossing points. So the idea of a dedicated crossing point is somewhat says that this is a movement corridor for vehicles and pedestrians, you shall cross at your particular point. So we're trying to alter that thinking and that mindset in a place for people sense when it's got that real place for people, because it should be almost that the cars can only cross at this certain point or this certain time, or they've got to press a button to be able to go through here because this is the place for people. I'll just jump back to my the comments here. So yeah, good. Remove all people, green space and gardens. Now we're talking about other elements that are really going to enhance the place value of an area. And speed. Good, we got in there. So if you are going to be moving vehicles through there, wow, you want them to be going extremely slow. We don't want to encourage this as an area to travel through. So you can see that a lot of these features that we know are going to make it a much better place to go and have a coffee, to go and socialize, to set up a little stall, have a market, these sorts of things. It's going to be much more livable, more a place that you want to go to, and it's also going to have much better safe system alignment. But we can get much better safe system alignment in an area like this in ways that don't align with the place function. And that would be to start to do things that block off pedestrians from crossing wherever they want, corral them into specific crossing spots, like pedestrian fencing, for example. We would probably get safer outcomes with big pedestrian fences and stopping them crossing and just giving them 1 point. But you are eroding place value by doing that. So let's have a look at a few artistic impressions of this. And there's few. So I grabbed these out of a NACTO guide, which is it's actually an American guide, Streets for People. But let's have a look at sort of some of the little tricks and things they did. So there's a lot to like about sort of what one of their artistic impressions here is, where you can see it has taken a lot of the features that you've mentioned there. It's not the full place for people because you just block all of this off. They have got a dedicated crossing point, which I'm not really a fan of, and I don't think it's needed in a 10 km/h. In Australia, certainly in Tassie, we would just do a shared zone, and this type of zone where pedestrians have priority through the whole area, and vehicles must stop and give way to a pedestrian the whole time. But you can see there, much more livable, much more a nice place to hang out, to play, to socialise and the like, and going to give just great safe system alignment due to the low speeds, probably lower vehicle numbers, and we're just having wins all round. But you're not going to move people and goods through there very quickly at all. If it became a little bit more, it's pushing up there, as somebody rightly pointed out. If it's got more movement requirements, that's when you start to delve into the separation a little bit, and you create these corridors using separated bike facilities, large pedestrian walkways, and that's a movement function as well. Remember, to be able to move pedestrians through there quickly is a movement corridor as well, and public transport and some crossing points. So you can see we're trying to ensure that we get our safety outcomes complementing what we want to see from a transport planning land use perspective. Any questions on that, or anybody have anything different or want to add something? Now, one point I'd make with this, and sort of my, just a little sort of inside tip, is that I find we get huge traction in road safety when we don't talk about safety and we just talk about livability. And we talk about encouraging people to walk, to cycle, to have great, greenery and livability and just wonderful places in the city. Now, by default, we get safety out of those. So a lot of the time, depending on the group that we're sort of trying to work with, community group or others, we'll often talk about a lot more about this place making rather than safe system making, if that makes sense. When we look at the local streets, which is the next sort of category along, this is where we've said this has low place value and low movement function. Now, it has sort of some movement function usually because it's access to local, to people's houses, or it's very sort of local sort of access style stuff, not moving through the area with people and goods, and it's got low place value. I certainly don't, if you're out there doing stakeholder consultation with people on these, don't tell them that their street has low place value. They don't like that. But we're thinking about it from a sort of holistic perspective of the of the state everywhere, all the roads, we've sort of defined it as low place value. But when you get yourself in these and you're sort of in this balanced trade-off between movement and place, it just happens to be low in both in this case. The prioritization of the most vulnerable becomes our priority. Okay, so this is where we then say, well, we can and we should be having very low speeds. We should make this a very awkward sort of access when you're in your car. And that's because we're not trying to get people through there very quickly from that perspective. And in fact, we actively want to discourage them from ever going through there and rat running. And that's not what we want. There's a little thing that in transport planning, it's sort of like what you get taught in your early on in transport planning, and it's the road user expending the most amount of their own energy should be given priority. So that's people walking, then people cycling, then people utilising public transport, and then sort of passenger vehicles come at the end. Now it kind of works very similar in the sense of who should we be thinking about in vulnerability, and it happens to line up with very, very similar sort of hierarchy. But yeah, these areas, we really have to prioritize the vulnerable road users in these areas, and it's going to come with low speeds and lots of hopefully ways to try to slow vehicles down. So here's another example. I won't get you all to do this one. I'll just sort of talk it through. Here's another picture, but it's probably got a lot more going on than you really would for a lot of local streets. But again, we see a lot of similar features where we're providing those larger sidewalks or footpaths. We're providing much lower speeds. We've got more movement function built into this, though, the ability to sort of drive a car through there a bit easier than the last one, but we're still really sort of slowing vehicles down. It's going to be more livable as a result. It's going to be a huge amount safer as a result as well. But we do tend to operate and design and manage our local streets as absolute car movement style corridors. Yeah, and we need to probably alter the way we think about some of that. Any questions or comments on the sort of local street style categorization? The one thing we do, I think, need to do as we sort of transition to more this look and feel, which is much nicer, and it's kind of got a bit of that European feel to it, doesn't it? But the use of local area traffic management, we'd call it. So that's speed humps, chicanes, different slow points, ways to slow vehicles down through an area. Let's go to vibrant streets. This becomes the really tough category. Okay, the reason it's super tough for planning and strategic thinking and the like is that it's got high place value, but it's also got a high movement function. So we are trying to move people and goods through there at a reasonable pace, but it's also a high place value. And these are usually sort of your high streets, which are built up. So it originally started just a movement corridor, and then people recognize, they can get some trade from these passing motorists, and they build a few shops, and then it sort of builds up around it, and then you've got all these shops and bars and cafes and things on this main sort of road, because that's where people have been driving through, and they've got it. And now we're finding, it's actually starting to become this real place to go, but we're still running this movement corridor. So let's do this one, and this is quite a sort of a big road here, but we see there it's got lots of vehicles, a high sort of speed limit because it was a movement corridor, but we're trying to now make it that vibrant place. So the place value, we're trying to really move that place value up. You can see it's got an overpass, pedestrians for pedestrians there. It's got fencing in the middle and the like. Now, how are you going to transform this now to give us better safety outcomes, better alignment with safe system principles, acknowledging that this holds that movement and place function, and we're trying to get people and goods, not necessarily in cars, but cars as well, through there in a reasonable fashion still, but retain as much of the, build as much place value into it as we possibly can. So same as we did last time, have a think about what are we going to do to alter this environment to make it better aligned with safe system principles by either altering exposure, likelihood, or severity factors, and make it a much better place to meet up with people, to socialize, to chat, to trade, and to hang out. Now, I'm going to give you a good sort of. Well, I'll make it. We'll come back at 5 to 11, or in 7 minutes. So what I want you to do is have a think about that, jot some ideas down. You can put them in the chat, but also have a stretch, go fill up your coffee, and we'll reconvene in 7 minutes. I'll just leave that on the screen. Okay. I'll give you another 20 seconds just to get yourself back into it, and I've sort of got the chat up and running on my phone so I can see both the slides and the chat, which is good. Seeing some ideas coming in. Okay. So we're trying to create here a feeling of place for people, but also retain or encourage movement of people and goods through here in this vibrant streets category. If I go back one slide just to that vibrant streets category, you can see there, yeah, place, both place and movement. So the challenge we've got there is, in order for it to be a place for people or have high place value, the idea of corralling and forcing pedestrians especially to cross, or to have to walk up and over and things like that, it sort of erodes a bit of place value. Also fencing off pedestrians and sort of corralling them along, again, is eroding that. But we have this challenge because we also want to move people and goods through there at a bit more speed than usual. So we're in a bit of a dilemma and a bit of a bind there. But I do like the thinking that people are coming up with in terms of sort of trying to utilize that overpass, and that would really more in my mind be just a movement corridor, because you're actively separating out the users there. So let's have a look as we go at sort of again an artistic impression of this, and I see some of the ideas who are coming in aligning quite well with this. But to keep that place value, really the idea of overpasses don't quite align with that. They align really well with the movement part of it, but not the place part of it. So you can see there again, widening of footpaths and those sort of things, but big investment in your movement corridor through other forms, being public transport, cycling, and the like. So not just passenger vehicles, and more greenery and more livable. There are more dedicated crossing points. So I mean, as in it's sort of encouraging and formalizing where crossing will happen. You can see there the speeds, and this often surprises people, that we're down at around a 40, even though it's a movement corridor. But again, it's movement through there in a reasonable amount of time, acknowledging the place value is still high. So we're trying to find that right balance, and it also aligns quite closely and quite well with our tolerance to physical force. I mean, it's not quite at our 30 that we'd like, but you've got that movement function happening in the central sort of areas, a bit further away from where there's more and more vulnerable road user activity and that separation. Now, I suppose this sort of presents the challenge of how do we get ourselves to these environments in these sorts of streets. And I don't know which ones in Hobart or in Launceston you'd sort of consider the ones with high movement, high place value, maybe a Davey Street or the like, where it's going through the sort of areas you've got lots of excitement and activity, and you want to build that and make it more livable, but you're still trying to move vehicles through there. And it is going to also come with some mode shift, and are we ready for that? Well, I think that's a long-term sort of change that we're looking to make happen. There are sort of, artistic impressions always make things look easier than they are. But, there are different ways that we're starting to recreate these streets with, providing those dedicated bike facilities. So you get that movement for bikes, but you can continue to get good place value and separated intersections like this that are coming along online. Sort of separated bike facilities like this would continue your movement corridor quite nicely. Not adding a huge amount of place value, but it's starting to build and improve that. Questions or comments on that at this stage? Okay, I'll just check the chat there. Yeah, so some good ideas coming in on the chat there as well. So thinking along the right lines there. When we think about a facility like this, in terms of does this change the exposure to crashes, the likelihood of crashes, or the severity of crashes? I tend to sort of place this in the likelihood of crashes. The reason I do that is because you might be tempted to say, well, they're not exposed to crashes. I kind of feel that they are exposed to crashes from the entering and exiting vehicles, and the also the fact that these curbs, it'd be quite easy if a driver was distracted or the like that they could mount that curb quite easily and enter the bike lane. It's much lower likelihood that that's all going to happen, but it's still sort of a potential exposure there. When we get to those movement corridors, this is very much where we start to get into that space, which there were a few ideas in the last one, which were going to really enhance the movement function. But this is where we would start to say, if this was a movement corridor for vehicles, maybe bikes as well, or public transport as well, but we're going to actively try to stop pedestrians entering the area, crossing, congregating, mingling, and the like. So we would be able to put fencing or barrier systems up to block that. We maybe would create completely dedicated cycle lanes, again, with ability to stop pedestrians ever accessing those. This is where you'd probably be looking much more at, can we do overpasses, pedestrian overpasses or underpasses, because we're trying to pump vehicles and cyclists maybe through there at speed. We don't want them to have to stop every block to as pedestrians cross and the like. But inevitably we end up with these movement corridors where they do cross other roads or areas where pedestrians cross, and then you need to get back to managing your speeds to tolerable energy levels where these conflict points occur. So here's another example of a very big movement corridor, and it's very much a traffic route. It's about moving vehicles through there. Crosses another traffic route, and there's a little bit of pedestrian activity as well. So this is where we're starting to look at those raised intersections, slowing vehicle speeds down, and trying to keep them moving mid-block, slow them down at these big conflict point, dangerous, high-risk spots, and have them speed up again. Ideally, if this is movement corridor, we would have grade separated this. And when I say grade separated, that road would have just continued over, like sort of almost starting to get into your urban motorway style. But the costs and challenges associated with that usually restrict us. So when we think about pedestrians, so that's probably like a very brief introduction to movement and place thinking and alignment with safe system principles. But I do come back to that point that I made earlier, which was around we can get safety under different frameworks. We can get our safe system alignment under different frameworks, and in some instances and with some groups and the like, we'll get far better traction putting it in that way rather than through a pure safety reasoning for doing things. It also can work quite well, as I mentioned a couple of modules back, in terms of outer areas where we're trying to maybe manage speeds down a little bit, and thinking about how we might do that through reduced carbon dioxide emissions, so meeting different greenhouse gas targets and those sort of things. So sort of optimal driving speed for most petrol vehicles is somewhere around that, around the 80 km/h mark, in terms of you get the most distance for fuel. It's the right balance is around that. Going at 100, you burn more fuel than you get, and going lower, you're burning less fuel, but you're not getting as far. So around the 80 is generally about right, which also sort of aligns quite nicely with sort of some of our aspirations for some of our higher speed road network that really doesn't have the infrastructure facilities to be able to drive at 100, and we want to sort of edge them down. And maybe we leverage off some of that sort of stuff, or less, so less fuel consumption, less greenhouse gases, or less cost to people. We certainly know a lot of freight companies run their fleet, which will at 90 usually would be a maximum, and they do it for economic reasons. Yeah, they like the safety implications, but that's not their driver. The driver is that somebody's crunched the numbers, and the time that it costs them to drive never above 90, as in extra, paying out shifts and the like. They save way more than that through less fuel consumption, and so they make it as a investment decision, and there's big safety benefits. So I think we can look at other ways to get our safety outcomes, because people are often reluctant if we're talking about the safety of them as an individual. Anyway, just something for you to think about. But back to vulnerable road users now, and cyclists and pedestrians, we know they're our most vulnerable to injury. It's generally seen around that 10% risk of severe injury, around the 20 km/h impact speed, and we know sort of up around that 30 is for the death, and 50 is almost certain death. Young and old, even more vulnerable, obviously, and so ideally we're managing speeds around that 20 km where there's significant pedestrian volume. And we want to separate. Separating's good if we want to keep vehicle speeds up. Separated bike facilities are becoming more and more prevalent, and there's more work going on in this space. And we talked about the advantages of roundabouts before, but roundabouts don't tend to give as good advantage to cyclists or pedestrians. Now, there is a bit of research to show that pedestrians actually do get quite decent safety benefits from the installation of a roundabout, but it's really an inhibiting permeability. Pedestrians don't like to cross near roundabouts. It causes other challenges from that perspective. So what can we do to encourage and make roundabouts better for pedestrians without ripping them out and causing other challenges? And this is where we start to see sort of different innovative intersection treatments for roundabouts catering for pedestrians and cyclists. And this is an artistic impression of Moray Street, which is a roundabout, first of the protected roundabouts, we'd call them, that was implemented, and that's been built. And the idea being that a cyclist sort of approaching goes off-road as such onto these raised areas and can sort of go around and do their turn that way, and off they go. It also has protected pedestrian facilities as well. Now, I think we're going to see a lot more of these in these sort of urban areas where we're trying to encourage walking, encourage cycling, and we will get the safety outcomes accordingly. It also becomes an interesting way to then try and think about managing larger roundabouts and more challenges where we have 2-lane roundabouts and we have higher speed. So maybe you've got a main highway sort of coming through here, crossing still a major road. The theory still applies. These ones haven't been trialed. Nobody's quite sort of out there doing this yet, but the idea is still similar. You could get a cyclist sort of off-road, have their dedicated facility through, and then they could join back. You're just trying to remove the vulnerable road user from that area of high sort of complexity and challenge and vehicles turning over. So then we'd see a vehicle like a bike rider wanting to turn right would come in and then sort of prop here, have a staged crossing, and off they'd go. As a cyclist, to turn right from here, you're in a real challenge because you either got to muscle across the lanes and get in there, or you're trying to go from the outside and then cross multiple lanes of traffic that could be continuing on straight. It's very challenging. But I like the thinking. People are starting to think and work through this and try and find ways that we can continue to see the really good safety features of the roundabout for passenger vehicles, but also facilitate the pedestrian and cyclist use. And I like this little diagram. It's a adaptation of a Dutch diagram. The original, got to give credit to the Dutch for coming up with everything cycling that they possibly can. But the idea is that we have this sort of lane sharing possibility. And we call this little doohickey a sharrow. It's called a shared arrow. But the idea is that the same lane space could be used by cyclists or vehicles up to about that 30 km/h, because that's sort of that tolerable limit we talk about in terms of speed and energy for vulnerable road users. Now, admittedly, when we get into the idea of a what we would call 8 to 80, and the theory is that if you can design your road network for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, you will cover everything in between. And I don't think a 30 km/h, shared space is really, conducive for an 8-year-old. You wouldn't be sending your 8-year-old out to muscle it with trucks and four-wheel drives and the like. The safety's decent, but even so, we sort of draw a limit around that if you're sharing. Then we actually start to physically separate, and we have raised separating curbs, or you can sometimes push your parking out and then have the cyclists going the other side of the parking, and you're utilizing the parking almost as a barrier between the other vehicles. And you sort of run different variations of that around up to higher speeds around the 70 km/h mark. And then it's a fully separated facility. I mean, we don't want to see on the 80 km or 100 km/h roads cyclists interacting, because when mistakes happen, the energies are just so high, the death and serious injury are unavoidable when those collisions actually happen. So that's when we want fully dedicated, separated facilities. The practical implications of this, super challenging. I mean, we have these sort of touring cyclists, and we have all different recreational cyclists and the training cyclists out there on the road network. And often, you can build these facilities and they're just not going to be used by a portion of those cyclists. So it's not a sort of one size fits all. But there are different things people are working on, different times of day where it's sort of prioritization of the training cyclists and areas and roads which have variable speed limits that go down, and even blocking off the ability to block off roads at different times of day, acknowledging that it, 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning till 7 in the morning on Sunday or Saturday and Sunday, that it can be a road that is a cycling training route. Like, we're not trying to move vehicles through there at high speed. It's very low impact on the vehicle traveling public. So there's ideas like that popping up, and people are trying different things. Just stop there for a second and see if anybody wants to make any comments. And we're seeing, there's a few that have popped in that I missed, and I apologize. So we're talking about car dooring in the chat there. And yes, so dooring is an interesting term that's popped up in the last, I suppose, 10 years as a big term. I mean, we've always had the concept of somebody opening your door in front of you as a cyclist, and we do see that. So yeah, lots of different design features to try to minimize dooring crashes, and the dooring incidents are often most severe where the dooring occurs on a route where the cyclist is knocked into the travelling lane and there's a secondary impact. So it's not, I mean, there are serious injuries associated with hitting the door itself, but most of the deaths we've seen and the very high level serious injuries have been that secondary overrun when the cyclist has hit and fallen, and then something's happened there. So yeah, we certainly like the idea of shifting cyclists to a curbside with parking moved out, because that gives us separates us away from the doors in a nice way. But some other simply not having parking in the areas helps as well. But yeah, running cyclists on a cycle route close to doors is going to be problematic. Absolutely. Okay, so that's good. Anybody want to make any comments that I haven't covered yet on cyclists? I'm going to have a chat about some pedestrian features, and then we'll get into motorcyclists, and got a little time allocated at the end just to go around and see if each of you have got any questions, or in the roles you're doing, if you've got any specific things you're interested in having a chat about. Okay. So let's jump in and have a chat about pedestrians. So pedestrians, again, obviously highly vulnerable to injury, and we do things like pedestrian crossings. So called, commonly called a zebra crossing. If we raise a zebra crossing, we call it a wombat crossing. So a raised zebra crossing is a wombat crossing. And there's an interesting sort of discovery in the research was that a at-grade pedestrian crossing, so a zebra crossing without any raised features, pretty much has zero road safety benefit, or in fact can make things worse sometimes, because we still have that vehicle speed approaching the area. Pedestrians have priority, so they will walk across that with more confidence, less looking to see what's coming. And so we have incidents occurring at higher speed. As soon as it's raised, it becomes an extremely safe facility. So it's interesting, isn't it? The reason for that is the vehicles approach it, they slow down on the approach to navigate over the vertical deflection, the raised part, and pedestrians are in a better spot for vision. They're at a higher level. They don't need to drop down into the road and come up. And so we see great road safety wins out of these raised crossing points. We also see improved accessibility for older pedestrians or those in wheelchairs and the like. So other wins outside of just the road safety space. But I have this little rule of thumb that if you're going to put a pedestrian crossing in, as in you've got that much sort of pedestrian demand, or you want to encourage pedestrians in that much, then you've got enough to raise it. Like, I really don't see circumstances out there where we shouldn't be raising these. Now, people will come up with ideas of why you wouldn't, and it could be to do with buses or freight, so trucks and the like, not liking to go over these sort of things. There are ways we can design these to be much friendlier for those vehicles, but I really do encourage the use of raised crossing points like this. And it's good. We're seeing a lot more of those roll out in Tasmania and around Australia. Here's this little analogy to show that I think we have thought about safe system for vulnerable road users for a very long time. And we know how to do it, but we just haven't really afforded it to the general public. This is in Adelaide, okay? And this is quite a while back. And you can see there that there's some construction going on, or some works going on. There's actually some works going on down in here in the electrical conduits for the traffic signals. So there's a couple of workers who've been working there for a couple of weeks, just doing electrical work, wiring, things, upgrading bits and pieces. And so in South Australia, they have a 25 kilometre per hour speed zone for work sites. So that was implemented. It was the road back in the day was 60 kilometres per hour, but it's now down to 25. They put the barriers out to, in case somebody is distracted and they won't hit the workers. And they proceed to go about doing all their work, and then they finish, and then they pack everything up, and it goes back to 60 kilometres per hour. And then about 3,000 pedestrians a day stand in pretty much exactly the same spot that the workers were. So the reality is that we create a safe system for the workers, but we don't afford that same level of protection to the travelling public. And people might often say, well, the workers are concentrating on their work. They're not looking around for vehicles and those sort of things, so we need to provide. Well, the reality is that a lot of the pedestrians are looking at their phone. They're intoxicated. They're really not, they're running to get the bus. So they're taking extra risks. So they're at very high risk as well. So really, I do come back to that point that we know what safe system is. And it's pretty much workplace health and safety. That level of safety that we say it's unacceptable for any worker to be killed going about their job. Well, the safe system says it's unacceptable for anybody to be killed going about their travel. And we should alter and change our system accordingly. And if you ever asked in a very short amount of time to explain what the safe system is in terms of the road environment, just say, workplace health and safety, it's pretty much that, just given that level of safety and thinking and consideration and value to everybody traveling around. We see improvements in some of this, and we're seeing more protection in different areas where vulnerable road users are in higher speed road environments. One interesting study I was looking at the other day again was around the massive increase in risk associated with anywhere there is public transport. And I alluded to it in just the slide back, but we run a lot of trams, as you know, in Melbourne, and we have a lot of any route that has a tram on it has double the pedestrian risk as a non-tram route in the same sort of environment and the like. And the reason for that is just the absolute chaos that happens when somebody's tram is coming. And they will run across traffic, they will run like to get that tram, their risk taking goes sort of off the charts for a small second in order to get that tram. So an interesting one just to ponder. And here's a Tassie example, a nice one there in Devonport, isn't it? There, and you see some wonderful sort of features of raised points where we've got pedestrians crossing, raised facilities. It's going to get beautiful safe system outcomes because the speeds will be lowered through that for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for vehicle-to-vehicle crashes, and especially breaking up that straight run without any vertical deflection. And we're looking to raise different crossing points. We call this sort of a threshold treatment, where you'd raise the entry as you're walking along a footpath. You want to cross across, well, without deviating them too far off their travel line. You want to have a raised crossing point so it's very clear for drivers turning in, pedestrians are crossing. And it's all about reducing the likelihood and severity of crashes as pedestrians cross the road. Just a reminder that speed limits are an amazingly effective tool we have in our toolkit in road safety there. And this is the diagram of the year where the default speed limit in urban areas changed from 60 to 50, 50 urban default. And you can see there the step change we saw there in that urban default speed limit change for pedestrian crashes. So it's pretty exciting, possibilities we've got there. Right, any questions on pedestrians, cyclists before I have a brief discussion about motorcyclists? Okay, so let's have a chat about motorcyclists. Actually, I'll just sort of stop that just to check I haven't missed anything. Yes, some chat about Davey Street there. Very good. Are any of you motorcyclists? No.
Craig is.
Of course Craig is. I've seen his Vespa scooting around Hobart there. Let's have a chat about motorcyclists and generally, before I jump into some of the ways to think about motorcycle safety, the challenge we've got is motorcycling is our most overrepresented road user group in terms of trauma. Now, overrepresented, I mean for the amount of vehicles that there are and the amount of travel being done on motorcyclists, the amount of death and serious injury is staggering. And in fact, there's a general sort of, the TAC says you're 30 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured traveling from A to B on a motorcycle than in a passenger vehicle. And there's obviously many factors associated with that, isn't there? We've got the vulnerability of the fact that there's not a shell to protect. We've got a smaller road user, so easier to be hidden behind things. And it's inherently not stable. We've got people using it for different purposes. Some of those for getting a bit of a thrill or getting the freedom and often sometimes taking a few risks associated with that. So it's a hugely potent combination. I can guarantee you that if we were starting from scratch here with a road network and motorcyclists had not been a road user previously and they came with this device of a motorcycle and said, I would like to use this on the public road system, we would say absolutely not. The risks are. But the fact is that we've got motorcycles, they're part of our, we register them, we license them. Thus, we, to a degree, have a duty of care to try to provide the safest facilities possible. So I'll talk about motorcyclists predominantly from a road perspective here, but I will have a little bit of a chat more about some of the other things that we can and do. But let's talk about roads first and motorcyclists. So I like to think about these 5 S's. Sight, can you see a motorcyclist or can a motorcyclist see what's coming up? Is the surface appropriate? Do we have good signs to warn, to inform, to guide? What will a motorcycle hit when they come off the bike, or what is going to hit the motorcyclist? And what are the speeds of travel? When we look at those in terms of the likelihood and severity, we see that the sight, surface, and signs are sort of likelihood factors. The strike is the severity because the crash is now happening. How bad is it going to be? And the speed being that magic thing in road safety, where we influence both the likelihood and the severity of crashes, because at lower speeds, you've got more time to react, more time to evade, so there's less chance of a crash happening. But if it does happen, it's less severe. There's some really interesting research just came out a couple of years back on motorcycle crash injury curves. So you remember we've been talking about those curves and chance of death, and this gave us some more insights into motorcycles compared to cyclists or pedestrians. And we really used to just think of a motorcyclist as a pedestrian or a cyclist just going at greater speed. And now we can see that there are some shifts in this. And we use the sort of looking at a maze 3 serious injury or fatality. And you'll see that term pop up quite a bit in road safety. It's an injury severity index, and a 3 is your highest level severity index in the severity. So it's not killed, but 3 and up is our worst, and then fatality, obviously death, a death within 30 days of the incident in most jurisdictions. But anyway, I'll just leave those in your notes there, and you can have a look at those in more detail if you're interested in some of the specifics of it. It's worth having a look at. But motorcyclists are often hidden behind different smaller objects at intersections and the like. So there you go. You can see the motorcyclist sort of popping out from behind the tree there, hidden behind the tree, and that quick glance that a driver might make. And we know there, so we're increasing the likelihood of crashes from hidden behind objects. And the severity is going to be bad due to the vulnerability and the like of the rider. We look at surface. Surface becomes a really important thing for motorcyclists due to the fact that they've just got these 2 small contact patches on the road. And as a rider takes a curve or a corner, they lean. And so we've got the center of gravity shifted out, and the surface has just become so critical for the rider. And any sort of surface defects, we see riders much more susceptible to death or serious injury. We often call motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine when it comes to road surfaces. They will be the ones first killed or seriously injured, indicating a problem. We often will place surfaces that are not friendly for motorcyclists on the road, like these big steel plates. And so that's they're obviously doing some trenching or something down in the road, and in order to be able to have traffic go over that in the interim, they put the big steel plate down. But we're creating a very slippery surface for a motorcyclist or a cyclist for that matter. And you think if it got a bit wet, and maybe the motorcyclist was traveling behind a truck or something like that, so they couldn't see it from a long way out, and maybe it's a night, we were creating quite a mix, which the likelihood of crash will just go up very high. We do have motorcycle-specific warning signs to try to talk specifically to motorcyclists. They're very good at seeing a sign like this and understanding that there's something particular there that a motorcyclist will have trouble with. So I think we can actually use the levers of likelihood quite well for motorcyclists. And I don't want to strike and talk to you very briefly about some of those energy impacts of that a motorcyclist can handle. I showed you the curves before, but there is a European crash test protocol for motorcyclists hitting barriers or vehicles hitting motorcyclists or the like. And I'll show you just a bit of video footage of that. This is a motorcycle. It's a crash test dummy. They kit it up with a helmet and leathers, and then they slide it on a sled, and then they stop the sled, and the motorcyclist continues sliding into whatever you aim it at. And then the test is done. The one for barriers is done at 60 kilometers per hour at a 25-degree angle, and you shoot it at the post of the barrier system. So I'll show you that. Bear in mind, these dummies cost about $350,000 as well, just for context there. So you saw with that first one, it hit the post and it just obliterated the dummy. When there was that rail underneath, you can see it deflects the energy and moves the rider along. Absorbs a little bit of energy and then moves the rider along. So I'll play the first one again, just so you see the difference in the forces and impact hitting the upright post compared to just that rail, so it deflects energy along. And the first dummy that they used was a write-off after it hit that post. Okay, so this sort of leads us into the thinking about strike for motorcyclists, and if we can try to redirect energy, absorb energy, it's really beneficial. It can be very challenging to do, though. Before I jump on to that, I just want to, I suppose, talk a little bit about some myths there with motorcyclists, and especially wire rope safety barrier systems. You may have heard motorcyclists talking about wire rope barrier systems being some cheese cutter or something for motorcyclists. The reality is that wire rope barrier systems don't present a big risk to motorcyclists for a number of reasons. The first reason is that we don't tend to use wire rope systems in areas where motorcyclists are likely to come off and leave the road. The reason for that is we can't. And I'll explain very briefly why. If you're looking down on a road and you're looking down on a barrier, sorry, I'm just going to get my pen going again. And if it's a windy sort of route like this, and maybe up in the hills, a motorcycle touring route, and they like these windy routes, if we were to put a wire rope barrier system around here, the way we do that is we put the posts in, we string the wires through, and then we anchor them into the road, and then we tension them up. And we put more and more tension on those cables, right? I think you can see what will happen there. At some point, your wire wants to go into the middle of the road there. And so what you actually see is that as you tension a wire rope, if it's on quite a tight curve, your posts start to bend and then eventually fall over. So we don't put wire rope safety barrier system on these windy roads because it's not a good use of your product. In fact, you can't really do it. So that's one, is that we use wire rope safety barrier usually where there's long straights. On your big highways, freeways where it's fairly straight and long. And it's for vehicles that people are asleep, basically. It's a fatigue management device. They've fallen asleep, they leave the road. Yeah, maybe, okay, they might have been distracted and they leave the road. Motorcyclists very, very rarely leave the road on a long straight. They don't fall asleep on the bike the way you fall asleep at the wheel. So the idea of them interacting with a wire rope system on a long straight it's tiny, low chance that will happen. So that's sort of one big reason why. The second one is that for all the motorcycle incidents out there, we've looked at, and wire rope's been a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of them. And any time that a motorcyclist has struck a wire rope safety barrier system, it's been the posts themselves that have done the damage, not the wires. So motorcyclists, when they crash with any barrier system, tend to either be off the bike sliding, or they hit the barrier system, they go over the top and their bike sort of stays on the other side. The idea that somehow the wires would slice a rider is just, we've never seen any evidence of that. The one point that is probably valid is that we don't really have a good retrofit device that we could add. Like you saw in this example here with the video, you saw that there was that rail underneath. We call that a rub rail or an underrun protection. We don't really have anything to add to wire rope systems to give that similar effect, but we don't tend to need it because motorcyclists aren't hitting wire rope systems. Anyway, I just wanted to sort of address that one if you've heard that challenge come up. And you've got some sort of Tasmanian motorcycle enthusiasts who have some passionate views in these areas. So it's just being, I suppose, a bit aware of some of that. Speed. So certainly managing speeds for motorcyclists is a really important. And if we can encourage lower speeds or encourage appropriate speeds into curves or different areas, we see less likelihood of crash, we see less severity of crashes. So speed advisories are great. And, you know, we want to just ensure the consistency of these across a route and trying to highlight area, sort of curves that are out of context. We're doing quite a bit of work at the moment in trying to create a device that we can add to these to make them frangible. Frangible is a term we use to break away on impact for motorcyclists. So this galvanized steel post you see here, or the three of them, I mean, they're easily strong enough to kill a motorcyclist, and we just happen to be putting them on the outside of a curve, which is an area that a motorcyclist is likely to come off and slide to. And so there are different products out there. They all have some problems with maintenance and durability and cost and those sort of things. So we're just trying to add a device where you'd cut this off and you'd add the device in, and it would keep its structural integrity, but just break off. And so we're quite progressed on that. But again, it's about energy management, isn't it? We use these and we need these because they're going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. But how do we now think about the severity of crashes now when they happen? And the next sort of step that we usually go into is utilizing this safe system assessment framework. And it's an Austroads process that was developed and released late 2016. And it's a process to take the thinking that you've been doing at your intersection and formalize it and enhance it and start to put some numbers to it. And I'm not going to go through this because that's another sort of at least half day to really get your head around how you do that. And hopefully, yeah, we'll be doing that in person at some point when we can get there, and we'll go out and we'll have a look at an intersection and we'll run it through this framework just so you get an idea of that. Okay, so that's got me to a nice spot there that I wanted to give you this sort of overview of the safe system philosophy in the first couple of sessions there that we did, and then delve into some specific road users, have a good chat about some of the features you see out there on the road network from an infrastructure perspective, and talk about speed. And I did want to use sort of the last 10 to 15 minutes just having getting a little sort of insight from each of you in terms of the work you're doing, or any sort of projects you're either working on or you've thought about, and how they sort of align with some of the thinking we're doing there in exposure, likelihood and severity, or changing different behaviours. So nothing formalised, nothing they're specific, and I'm happy to answer questions or make comments on it if you've got particular things that you're interested in the role you're doing, and I may have some insights. I may know nothing about it, but yeah, happy to chat. So any volunteers to kick it off and just give a little window into the work you're currently doing in the context of what we've been talking about over the last 3 modules? Or do I start to pick people?
Oh, Ken, I can speak up this for a moment. Got a legislative inquiry.
Sorry?
Getting feedback.
Oh, sorry. I'll mute myself.
Excellent. No, that's okay. Legislative inquiry into road safety. We've got 93 submissions. And I'd say the majority is about addressing road safety will be improved by getting drivers to and road users behaving differently. Any thoughts on that?
So these are from the public, no doubt. And yeah, well, I suppose that first module we talked about, the public sort of seeing that as the way to fix everything. I think we need to, well, my opinion is that we need to try to work with that enthusiasm and do things that we know will work, that come under that banner. One of the sort of most crazy things I've seen is in Victoria we had an election coming up. This was a while back, and there was an election commitment that that all year 11 students will be put through advanced driver training courses. So, you know, this is the opposition goes, we will get in power. If we get in power, we'll put every year 11 through advanced driver training because, you know, there's nothing more important than the safety of our young road users. And they knew that the public would resonate with this. I think that's the answer. That's what we're talking about. Now we've got some real stuff. The road safety community, well, was just like shocked. This was like, this is insane. This is, you know, policy from the hip. This is no research, nothing. And so typical Letmans, they got in power. And then there was $70 million or something put forward to put everybody in through advanced driver training. And luckily, the crafty people at the TAC, or I shouldn't say crafty in a bad way, but I mean they were saying, what are we going to do here? We're not going to do that because we know that will increase death and serious injury under the current platforms. So how do we create something that does that? And they just basically shifted what advanced driver training was. And that's how they got the money to build the TAC's Road to Zero exhibition at the museum. They've got a dedicated hub, and every year 11 student goes to that and has some advanced driver training, which is all about them understanding risks on the road network, understanding the physics of energy management and the like. And then they go and do a little bit of driving in a basically a car park to just go, this is the indicator, this is the like. So it's almost like taking, and they've acknowledged, I said, right, okay, we're going to give it advanced training to these drivers. It's not going to be how to get out of high speed skids or things we know that don't work. It's going to be things that we know work. So I think possibly it's about, you know, reshaping and just working with your wonderful comms people to come up with those messages of how you are addressing that, and you are going to push more into that space with things that you know work. But yeah, it's going to be an ongoing challenge. Thanks, Craig. That's a good number of submissions though to have got in. And hopefully enough that you can handle without, you know, having to do too much extra work. All right, let's jump over and see if Carly's got anything to add there from maybe a similar sort of perspective.
You're going to pick me. Sally and I are working on a speed campaign at the moment, which is to complement Newton and Tom's project of the mobile speed cameras coming back next year, hopefully. So our sort of objective is to get people to understand low-level speeding as a problem as well, that it's not an individual risk, it's a collective risk. And yeah, I suppose speed in general, but you know, low-level speeding is an issue across the network, and just how we get that sort of message out there and get them to understand that it's a problem, because from all the focus groups and the research, it shows that people think it's okay to speed that 10% over, or especially on highways and stuff. So yeah, that's our problem at the moment, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I love the idea that you're already talking that individual versus collective in the communication of it and the like, because it's going to be so important with that to convince the public that that's a danger to them individually. I think we're doomed on that, you know. So how we communicate that. I mean, I just marvel at the way advertising agencies can sell stuff. They're just like just the most amazingly creative thinkers. And I think if we get the right agencies with that challenge of how do you communicate collective risk, and they can get their head around that, I think they could come up with some pretty exciting creative stuff that I don't think we would, or some of you might be that creative. I certainly can't come up with this sort of creative thinking, and these people can sell things like cigarettes and bottled water and things. You think, yeah, how do they bloody sell that? This is incredible, but they managed to do it. So how now we give them some challenge from our perspective. How do you sell that?
Yeah, our agency has come up with some concepts, which they're testing with focus groups at the moment. But the tagline is over is over. So it doesn't matter how over you are, it's still over. But yeah, portraying that from a community sentiment is probably the hardest part.
Yeah, it's not a bad one. I mean, because there is, as you say, good research out there that you ask people, in a 100 km/h speed zone, what speed should you be able to travel? And a lot of them go, say, more than 100, like 102, 103, whatever. So over and over is an interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a decent concept. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm keen to hear how that goes, and hopefully I'll see some more excitingly creative campaigns coming out of Tasmania.
We'll keep you in the loop.
Good. Thank you. I'm just going to keep going around my screen to see things to add. Emily, you're next in line there.
I am working on a project to identify enhancements to the current motorcyclist graduated licensing system in Tassie. So I guess that is targeting the likelihood of crashes and potentially the exposure if we raise the minimum age limit. But yeah, it's been really helpful to do this training and help to understand it through the safe systems lens.
Yeah, great. Well, that's good. I mean, graduated licensing for motorcyclists, I think, is such an important one. My experience in these different motorcycle safety initiatives, I used to work in the vulnerable road users area in Victorian government, and we were implementing GLS at the time. I wasn't as heavily involved in that as the infrastructure stuff, but I did find that motorcycle communities get very angry if there's any hint of something that is going to alter the exposure of motorcyclists, and it becomes out. They're invested in it from a sales perspective and other reasons, and a genuine this is a joy. This is such an important part of their life, and they don't want others to miss out and that experience. So, yeah, my advice is to try and maybe temper anything around exposure, even if that might be a byproduct and benefit of it. But yeah, that's I would say not necessarily an aim. It's all about as you said there, reducing the likelihood of it and maybe severity if we can get some speeds more appropriate and things. But that's exciting, and you get some great benefits there. I'll keep ticking along. Thank you, Emily. Newton.
Yep, so actually we're going through the slides. I kind of had a thought around the movement in place things and how we could help improve understanding through local governments on how to build those places. Because they're obviously, some of the proposed sketches there are pretty significant investments. And in order to get council across the line on those sort of things, they want to understand the benefits that come with it. And I guess I was wondering whether you guys have had much luck in doing that in Victoria at all.
Yeah, well, I think across Australia, everybody's realising that local government holds a wonderful lever in road safety. I mean, generally about half of trauma occurs on local government managed roads. I'm not sure it's quite as high as that in Tasmania. I think it's a little more state road related, but it's a good lever for us to be able to use. The TAC is heavily investing in it now in terms of giving money over for safety, but also running the parallel of them being able to beautify, improve the livability of their places and the like. So, yeah, there's good options there. So that's good. Thanks, Newton. Jordan.
I manage I answer a lot of the public correspondence we get, so a lot of complaints and why do you have this here, why do you have that there? And so a lot of it's about driver behaviour, like Craig said, but there's also a lot of explain this infrastructure to me. Why is it there? What good is it? And so I think this training will be quite helpful in answering those.
Yeah, good. Well, that's excellent. And please reach out if you do get ones that you don't have sort of standard words for, because inevitably I will have either written it at some point in my career, or I know somebody who will have written it. So I'll just be able to sort of pass you some words, or hand it over to others, or put you in contact with people, because we really need to share that. It's the same issues come up all the time, so we might as well be consistent. Thanks, Jordan. I'm just conscious of time here. I'm going to keep ticking along. Each of these I could talk for hours with you about, and I hope to at some point, but we'll start. So over to Tom.
As Kylie mentioned before, I've been working on the speed cameras in Tasmania, which again, hopefully will be early next year, but who knows? And I was wondering your opinion on whether they're overt or covert. So whether it's very obvious to the drivers there's a speed camera there, the mobile ones, or whether it's quite hidden until the speed's been detected.
Sorry, mobile speed cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd put them in the covert category, unless we're well, I suppose you're probably working through, are you going to sign these beforehand? I mean, New South Wales is going through their chaos of they sign them and they don't sign them, and then there's political backlash and they start signing them again. So that sort of ticks it over between overt and covert in my opinion. Are you going to sign them? Do you know?
Not sure about signage, but it's probably a mix between overt and covert. We're just not sure what that mix will be yet.
Yeah, and a mix is key across enforcement of overt and covert in my opinion. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Kylie. Yep.
Sorry, my internet's a little slow today. So we're currently working on a review into our learner license assistance program, which is designed for people with low literacy levels to get their L plates. So we do have a whole range of things that help learners, particularly Plates Plus, which is our newest, but a lot of people with low literacy can't use it. So getting those people on the road as opposed to driving illegally, and getting them educated about road safety behaviour.
Wow, that's really exciting, and I think another example of where we can be. We're not operating in a silo here, are we, with road safety? It's there's bigger picture stuff in the management and advancement of the community. So that's a wonderful initiative, and yeah, we'll reduce likelihood of crashes. Really predominantly targeted that, maybe a bit of severity as well. Well done, thank you. Sally, last one there.
Well, Carly and I have been working together on the speed campaign, which is our biggest one probably at the moment. So like she said, trying to position the problem before we come in with the cameras and updates to the system and present it as a solution, I guess. Yeah.
Well, speed is the big one. They talk about it as a silver bullet in road safety. People say there's no silver bullets, and then they go, actually, there is a silver bullet. We just don't like to use it, and it is speed and the management of speed. Anything we can do to crack that nut and get the public on board, and we're going to be hugely. It's going to be hugely beneficial, and please share it with share anything you do with the rest of the country. Ideas that you try that work, and even things that don't work. Presenting those sort of things at the road safety conferences and sharing that information can be wonderfully beneficial. So, yeah, good luck with it. And that probably takes us right on to the end of this session. And I want to thank you all. You're doing exciting stuff. Personally, like, I've always found road safety just this most rewarding career, because you're really in there using your professional skills, your knowledge, trying to solve a problem that is super complex, because it takes in all sorts of bits of society and physics and maths and social nuances and everything like that. So it's a really excellent challenge to be involved in, and it's a really rewarding thing if we can see things in place. You never know who you save, but you know you're saving people. So thank you very much. You've got my contact details. Please just reach out if you go, oh, I wonder if other states have done something in this. Flick me a quick email, and as I say, I'll just flick you back a name or a report or something like that, and keep you sort of delving on your journey with a bit more information. But yeah, thank you very much, Craig. Thanks for the opportunity to do this, and fingers crossed, I'll be over there at some time soon, and we'll get out there in person with some high-vis vests on and look at some intersections. Thanks everyone.
Ken. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken.
Cheers.
Bye.